It's the Pioneer 100 podcast, where we celebrate the history of Pioneer and look forward to the future. I'm your host, Max Armstrong, and in this week's episode, we look at the Agronomy Innovations. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Pioneer 100 podcast. I'm Max Armstrong, as we're reflecting here each week on the rich history of Pioneer and the many aspects of that history. And this week, we want to zero in on the agronomy innovations of the past century. And here to help with that discussion, we welcome Ken O'Brien. Ken is North America Agronomy Innovation Leader at Pioneer. Welcome to you, sir.
Thank you.
And also Mark Jeschke. Mark is the Agronomy Manager at Pioneer. And gentlemen, we've been talking about the genetics and this early path of Pioneer, the genetics management, driving productivity and yield. So I want to start with you, Mark. Explain how a change in genetics actually results in a change in how a farmer manages their field and vice versa.
Yeah, so we've seen, tremendous gains in corn productivity over the years. The genetics and management have both been core components of that, and that's been the subject of a lot of spirited debate over the years between the breeders and the agronomists as to who can claim more credit for that. But in reality, it's really tough to disentangle the two of those because they've evolved in tandem over the years. And I think probably the clearest example of that is around planting practices, and specifically around planting density, because that's been really historically been the main driver of yield gains in corn. Is it's breeding for increased stress tolerance that allows that plant density to go higher. So, if you're not keeping pace with your management practices, you're not getting the most out of those genetics. And we've seen improvements in drought tolerance, disease resistance, other examples over the years. Thinking of some more recent ones, just within the span of my career, the introduction of biotech traits in the 1990s. We had, BT corn really took something that was a front burner issue for corn production, of corn borer management, and I won't say solved it, but certainly it's not the frontline concern that it once was. In terms of how we're spending our management time. And then herbicide resistance traits, Roundup Ready being another one. I remember when I was a kid walking beans. I don't know if either of you guys got involved in walking beans.
Yeah, let's not go there. I break out in the sweat when you talk about that.
So, yeah, that's something we did back then. Just walk the rows, hand weeding escapes, and cultivation in corn was another one that that was part of the weed control program that I remember running the old Farmall 560 with a front mount cultivator on it. And, those are, two things that were standard management practices back then that we just, don't have to do anymore. So it's been a continual evolution over time. And, being a seed company, we're always looking for ways that, we can solve problems with genetics. But it's a combination of the genetics and management that really are going to allow a grower to be successful in kind of finding how those two can fit together, with a continually changing landscape of the challenges that we're facing in the field.
Pioneer officially established an agronomy department, right? Put that in perspective for us and how that was so important in the path of Pioneer.
Yeah, so agronomy officially became its own department in 1962. With Pioneer. It was the technical services department back then. So, I think you look back to Pioneer's founding in 1926, that, the technical education was always part of the business. And you think about our founding, it was, hybrid corn was a new innovation at that time. So right from the outset, helping growers understand how to use this new technology effectively was a core part of the business. But what we saw, I'd say really in the 1950s, is a period of rapid change in corn production, and we're really getting fully into the era of what I would call scientific corn production. So we had adoption of hybrid corn is 100% at this point. That was rapidly adopted through the 30s and 40s. I think we hit 100% around 1952 in the U.S. and yields are starting to take off at this point pretty rapidly. In fact, we look at USDA yield data from 1950s to 1970s, yield doubled over that period. So there's, the stakes are higher, there's more yield on the table, and at the same time, there's more tools available to growers. We've got new herbicides, atrazine came out in 1958, new insecticides, new planting technology. So there's just a lot more decision points and a lot more demand for information. So that really resulted in them formalizing that in 1962. And I mean, it started off as a part-time endeavor. They had 4 production plant managers that were doing this part-time of doing training meetings for sales reps, but they became full-time in that role within a year, and within a few years we're hiring more people into that agronomist role, and it's only grown since then.
As you look back over the past few decades, Ken, how's the role of the agronomist changed in what they are doing, what they do at Pioneer?
It changes nonstop to be an agronomist. So every field's different, every year is different. But if I try to look back over the 40 or 50 years, one thing that's changed is the uniform. I'm wearing what was the winter meeting uniform of the 1980s, was the green Pioneer jacket. So that's definitely changed. You don't see too many of the green Pioneer jackets anymore. But the role has changed a lot from a time when we had those winter meetings. That was a time where almost all of our Pioneer customers and many of the other farmers in the area would come to learn about the newest agronomic trends. You'd come once a year because you were looking at magazines, you were looking at other sources of information. There was no internet. You came to the Pioneer agronomy team to learn what was cutting edge in agronomy. Those core things have stayed the same. We still have to make sure we get the basics of agronomy done right. You've got to have the right seed for the farm. You got to get the fertility done correctly. You've got to get the basics done correctly. And then you build upon that to try to get higher and higher yields, because most of us still have room to increase our yields. We're not at these world record yields that we see happening. So the role of the agronomist has stayed the same in the fact that we're constantly going after how do we give the right management advice to maximize the performance of our product, but we've had to morph to technology, and that's not stopping. We continue to morph all the time.
Agronomy is intensely local, but here you are, a very, very global company. How do you ensure that a breakthrough in the lab or in another country translates to a specific farm where your growers are, whether it's in Iowa or Illinois, Texas, wherever?
Yeah, it's one of the benefits that Mark and I have of being part of the Pioneer agronomy team here in North America, is that we have counterparts across the globe. So oftentimes if something is new to the United States, it's maybe not necessarily new to production somewhere else in the world. So just a few years ago, corn stunt became something relatively new as a potential threat to corn in the United States. And we were able to very quickly, as the Pioneer North America agronomy team, leverage some of our resources from other parts of the globe that had experienced this disease before to figure out how to help our growers understand what it's going to mean locally. And even within North America, Max, I would tell you a big chunk of what we do from the Johnston offices is to provide some really broad context for agronomy and support, but it really happens locally. Those local agronomists are the ones who understand the challenges that are happening with their farmers. They're building the trials, they're executing the trials with the Pioneer sales representatives. We're helping support them, which is the role that we serve as the Pioneer agronomy team here in Johnston, is to support those local teams to answer the questions that our farmers have locally.
Mark, coming back to you, with the rise of AI and predictive modeling and other new technologies, how do Pioneer agronomists implement these technologies while still maintaining that role of trusted advisor to the producer?
So I think what we've seen over the years, I mean, the role of the agronomist has evolved. It has not become any less essential, though. And I think some of the core goals of supporting growers in getting the most out of their Pioneer products really remains the same. There's a phrase I hear us say a lot around here is, technology will not replace agronomists, but agronomists that use technology will replace those that don't. And I mean, that's true, but it's also always kind of been true. I mean, you look back over the history of the company and talk to some of the retired agronomists, you quickly realize that every generation had their transformational technologies, whether that's something related to corn production or in how you're communicating with growers and delivering information. And I think in any era, the people that are going to be successful are the ones that really hit the future head on in terms of adjusting to new circumstances, taking on new challenges that we're seeing in the field, or utilizing new tools in how they work with growers. So with generative AI specifically, that's one that we've obviously heard a lot about over the last few years, and it's something we use internally, and has some value in I think accessing and summarizing information. But the challenge that we see with that, with regards to agronomy, is that it's pretty good at working with information that's well documented, pretty well established, and is fairly universal across the landscape. And that's, in agronomy, that's not a space where we spend a whole lot of time. We're working on things that are new, things that are local, and where a certain solution might not work broadly across the landscape. And I, looking back just over the course of my career, and even over the last few years, have seen, can think of a number of examples where we've had a growing season where we've seen something in the field that we've never seen before. You think back a few years to tar spot in the U.S. was a new one. It was disease that had been around in Mexico for a long time and made the leap to the Corn Belt, and we suddenly had a lot to learn as to what that was going to do, how that was going to spread, and what impact that it was going to have on yield in the Corn Belt. And Kenny mentioned corn stunt a couple of years ago. Same deal. It's we had a lot of information on that disease from South America, where it's more common, to give us a start. But that was really the challenge that was before us at that point, is to take what we knew there and try to predict as to how it's going to unfold and impact yield here in the U.S. So, I mean, the role of the agronomist is, when we're dealing with a challenge like that, just the value of having that network of expertise out in the field is really critical for us to gather information and start getting our head around some of these new challenges that we're seeing in the field. And then, as well as delivering the information to the customers too. We've got a tremendous amount of technology, data, sensors, and all the equipment that we have. But at the end of the day, as a corn grower, I've got a handful of decisions that I'm going to make in that growing season that's going to impact the fate of that crop. So how do we take all that information and apply it to those decisions? What am I going to do with this that's going to allow me to make one of those decisions differently or better? And I think that's where the role of the agronomist really comes in tailoring that information to that particular grower, that particular set of environmental circumstances on that farm.
It occurs to me you have to stay alert and nimble in your business to really adapt to what's coming along, the things that farmers are going to be dealing with in the future. I guess that leads me to ask you the question, Ken, from the standpoint of new tools, new technology coming along, what are you most excited about in your field?
There's a lot. There's so much happening in the next decade at Pioneer. It's something that I'm excited about every day and nervous about every day, because we have a lot to get ready for, to make sure that we have the right agronomic information behind it to talk to our customers. If I had to pick like the top 2 or 3 things, just here recently at Commodity Classic, we launched fungicide timing for corn. That's something we're pretty excited about. It's a tool that's combining decision science and data science. So some of the tools and modeling, like we're talking about from a technology standpoint, with the understanding of Pioneer genetics and a great fungicide from Corteva called Forcevo that allows us to tell a grower field by field the right timing to make a fungicide application. Just by changing the timing of that application, we're on average adding 5 bushels of yield. So constantly trying to figure out, how do we add more yield? How do we add more yield? That one's here now, so that one's short term. If I go a little longer term, I'm excited to see what hybrid wheat's going to do for Pioneer. I think that it's got some potential to do some really significant things to wheat production and allow us to help solve agronomic challenges that wheat growers have while also increasing yields. And so I'm excited in the medium term to see what happens there, and at the same rough time and longer into the decade, gene editing across all of our crops I think has a lot of potential to really help us deal with some of the agronomic challenges we have with our crops today, as well as simply just add more yield. So like I said, there's so many things coming in the next decade at Pioneer that it's a challenge and a blessing all at the same time. But those are three that I'm really excited about: fungicide timing, hybrid wheat, and what we're going to do as an organization with gene editing.
Mark, talking about yield, we often talk about the yield increases, but what has been the impact of agronomy on efficiency and sustainability of the farm? Where have you left your fingerprints there?
I think we have an incredibly positive story to tell there, and I have the opportunity to host a lot of visitor groups here at Pioneer, and that's one that I share with a lot of groups that we have here. Is what we've seen with corn is tremendous yield gains over time that have not required a corresponding increase in inputs to get there. So our actual inputs in terms of water, fertility, other things like per bushel produced have actually gone down in some cases. I mean, you look at nitrogen use, for example, that's one where the nitrogen rate might have gone up on a particular corn acre. We look landscape wide though, it's really nitrogen use has remained flat since about the 1980s with the improved efficiency and management that we've been able to achieve, as well as working more soybeans into the rotation over that amount of time. So I think where it really stands out though, as far as improved efficiency and sustainability, is when we look at what I think is our most important input of all, which is land. The amount of crop area that we devote to corn production in the U.S. And I think there's kind of the general impression I sense out there that corn has kind of taken over the landscape and displaced other crops. And you actually look back at the numbers, that might be true locally in some places. Nationwide, though, that's not the case at all. Our corn acreage in the U.S. actually peaked in 1932. And we look back to 1926 at Pioneer's founding. Our corn acreage in 1926 and in 2025 were about the same. So we had 99.6 million acres of corn in 1926, and I think the latest USDA numbers were 98 million and change for 2025. But in 1926, that average yield is 26 bushels per acre. So to get the amount of corn that we produce today with 1926 yield levels, I mean, that would take 700 million acres of corn to do that. So, and I know this, we're in an era right now of pretty high yields and low commodity prices, and that, the yield gain message maybe isn't as well received. We're in one of these parts of the cycle, but you look, I think, like big picture global food security goals. I mean, that's tremendously important worldwide. The ability to produce more without using more land area, or ideally less land, to be able to do that. So I think that's a big one. And I think examples closer to home, just in terms of improvements that we've seen over my lifetime. BT corn was one that we talked about before. We go from, I remember flying on insecticide applications to try to control second generation corn borers. We go from that to control in the plant that's very targeted at just that insect chewing on the corn and not having an impact on other non-target insects. And another one's improvements in soil conservation have been tremendous over the years too. I think back when the moldboard plow and the disc were pretty common tools. When I was a kid, the adoption of reduced tillage, no-till, strip-till that we've seen, has been tremendous in terms of protecting the soil, and it's really taken a suite of innovations to get there. It wasn't just thinking to do it. It's for no-till, we need the genetics to get there. We need the early vigor. We need the disease resistance. We need the seed treatments to help the crop, endure what is often cooler, wetter conditions in the spring. We need the chemical weed management to take care of the weeds. We need the planter technology to deal with the residue and cut through that and create the furrows. So there's been a lot of innovation that has been involved in making that happen. And we look to the future at some of the advanced cropping systems that we're looking at, things like perennial cover crops. It'll be, if we get there, it'll be a combination of genetic and management innovation that'll do it.
Ken, wrapping up our discussion on the agronomy here, reflecting back on that initial philosophy of the long look, as it was described here at Pioneer, how does that guide your work going forward?
Still guides everything we do every day. We still, as an agronomy team, look and say that a key part of our job is to provide that management advice that maximizes the profitability and productivity of our products. So it's still what we look to do every day as an agronomy team, whether that's somebody who's writing our agronomy publications or that field agronomist or sales agent who's out there face-to-face with the farmer helping solve the problem in that particular field. So we still strive to do what we strive to start doing with an agronomy team back in the 60s, make sure we're providing the management advice that not just for this growing season for that farmer, but to help change their overall management practices to help drive their yields up year after year after year. So it's still a core principle of what we do every day when we're out working face-to-face with our farmers.
Thanks so much for enlightening us here, bringing such a discussion of great history, of Pioneer's 100 years. You've really shared with us some interesting insight about the role of agronomy. Ken O'Brien, Mark Jeschke, we certainly appreciate what you've done here and talking with us over the past few minutes. Gives us a whole new view of the work that goes on all the time at Pioneer. Take care. We'll see you.
Thank you.
And as we join you for the next episode in our podcast series, we'll take a look at Pioneer's role in advancing mechanization and other technologies beyond the genetics. Join us here next week on Pioneer 100. Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Pioneer 100 podcast. Join us next time as we continue to explore the rich history of Pioneer and its connection to the agriculture of tomorrow. Visit pioneer.com/100 to learn more.